بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Today inshallah we're going to begin an introduction to a new text on the subject of Usul al-Fiqh, which is the foundations of fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence. And the text that we're going to study and read through as a beginner text is that book written by Imam al-Sa'di rahimahullah, retitled رسالة لطيفة في أصول الفقه, the brief treatise in the foundations of fiqh. And today inshallah we'll do a bit of introduction into the science of the Usul al-Fiqh in terms of why we study it, and what are its benefits, and what kind of books have been written in the subject, and how a student can go about studying it. And the next week, inshallah, we'll go through the text bit by bit alongside the explanation of a contemporary scholar, Shaykh Al-Shathari, hafidhullah, from the scholars of Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, who's written a very summarized, a very nice explanation on the text, which is both comprehensive but also easy for a beginner. So the first benefit we want to cover today is the importance of this subject of Usul al-Fiqh. Because Usul al-Fiqh, the foundations of fiqh, is a subject which every student needs to study. It's a must. That they can't skip it such that they will move to other knowledges that later on will be exposed that they don't have foundation. They can't study properly, nor have proper understanding. So for those reasons, many of the people of knowledge praise the science. Like Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, who said that the knowledge of the foundations in general is from the most important sciences and that which is or takes precedence over all others. He mentions his Kitab al-Majmu', volume 1, page 633. That the knowledge of the foundations, Usul al-Fiqh, in general, is one of the most important of all sciences. And some of them even went so far as some of the scholars who say that it's the most important science. And obviously this is not the correct in absolute sense, because we know the science of Aqeedah and Tawheed is the most important. For the sharaf of ilm, the knowledge or the honor of a particular science is in consideration of its contents. So here, this science helps you understand the Kitab and Sunnah. But the knowledge of Aqeedah and Tawheed is to do with your beliefs. So no doubt that is the most important. And if you don't have that understanding of your religion, your beliefs, then you could become misguided. And especially if you die upon a very dangerous state. So this science has status. The scholars, they praised it. And many of them even suggested that a student, he cannot at all progress to the higher levels of knowledge until he knows it and masters it. And some also mentioned that this subject is especially important for the mujtahid, the one who seeks to become mujtahid, a scholar who can pass rulings and is able to understand the Quran and Sunnah directly from its sources. It means someone who's at that level. And none can even pass fatwa unless he has foundation usul al-fiqh and strengthen it. So no doubt it has virtue. And some of the ulama also said in relation to it that the person who skips it, man ضيع al-usul, whoever lost or wasted the subject of usul, حرم al-usul, he'll be prevented from reaching his goal and the haqq, the truth. Man ضيع al-usul, whoever wastes away the foundations, doesn't study it, doesn't perfect it, حرم al-usul, he'll be prevented from reaching his goal, which is the truth and knowledge. So this statement, this benefit here, the scholars repeat again and again to advise the student, whatever level that they end, at some point in their study, they must study something in Usul al-Fiqh. Ibn Khaldun, rahimahullah, the historian and the sociologist, he said that know that the foundations of fiqh is the greatest of legislative sciences, and the most honorable in value and the most beneficial. So again, some of them went to that extent that they said it's more preferable than any other subject. He mentions in the Kitab al-Muqaddimah, page 398. So no doubt the virtue of Usul al-Fiqh is there. The Rasala that we're going to study, the title of it is often referred to as رسالة لطيفة في أصول الفقه. But if you return to the original sources, you see that the title that is more correct is رسالة لطيفة جامعة في أصول الفقه المهمة. This is the more correct and complete title. رسالة لطيفة جامعة في أصول الفقه المهمة, which translates as the brief, comprehensive treatise on the foundations of the important fiqh. رسالة لطيفة جامعة في أصول الفقه المهمة. This is the correct title. And the scholars who looked at the manuscripts of the text, they found that this is the title which Shaykh Sa'di either he authored in it or it was narrated or relayed from him. Like in the Majmu' Mu'allafat Shaykh Sa'di, you find it, this is the title given to this text. So if you go back to there, Majmu' Mu'allafat Shaykh Abdur-Rahmaan bin Nasir al-Sa'di, volume 7, page 159 to 172, this is the text and the name. So even though some scholars just refer to it as Rısâle Latifa, that's the complete name. Now this text itself, the reason why we're studying it is because it's a simple text, and there are other books that we could study in Usul al-Fiqh versus this Risala. So the scholars, when they talk about studying Usul al-Fiqh, they give us the levels, from beginning, intermediate, and advanced. Same for the subject of Qawa'id al-Fiqh, the principles of fiqh, which is slightly different. We'll mention the difference. So this text is easier, amongst the easiest texts you can study. There are other texts just as easy, but this one is very summarized. If you see the amount of pages as well, it's very short. So Shaykh Al-Shathari, Hafidhullah, in explaining this, he says, in his muqaddim of the text, that this text, this here we're reading, that's between our hands, because literally he's saying we were studying here and explaining, is considered like the first brick in the foundation of studying the science of Usul al-Fiqh. So if you want to give the example of you're laying a foundation of Usul al-Fiqh, this is the first brick. The first one you begin with. Then he says you go to the Kitab al-Waraqat of Abi Ma'ali al-Juwayni. So you say you start with this, then to Waraqat. Because Waraqat has more. It's comprehensive, likewise, shorter in pages, but more comprehensive and more deep than this Risala. So on page 23 of his Sharh, Shaykh says this is why we study this book, very short. Although I found also Shaykh Sa'di has another book even shorter than this, referred to as, he titled it As-Safwa fi Usul al-Fiqh, the purity or the pure collection of in relation to Usul al-Fiqh, which is very, very summarized. But nonetheless, this is why we chose this text, due to its simplicity, and because many of us might not have a foundation or a background in Usul al-Fiqh, this is our first brick. So that way we don't jump to waraqat or another waraqat and we get totally lost and confused. In terms of the books that you study in the field, that we said there are books for Qawa'id al-Fiqh and Usul al-Fiqh. So the question some of us may have is, what's the difference between Usul al-Fiqh and Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya? So the scholars, when they talk about this, they're often related. Some texts, they cover both, some separate. This text we're covering is in Usul al-Fiqh, not Qawa'id al-Fiqh. For Shaykh Sa'di himself, he has a text, which we studied before long ago with some of the brothers, and later on, inshallah, we'll be able to study it. Manzuma Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya, the poem on the principles of fiqh. So he has a risala on Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya, and he has more than that, other texts. So what's Usul al-Fiqh about? Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, was a student of this author.
Definition of
Fiqh, we're going to get to all that, yeah. First we'll do the usul, then we'll get to the fiqh. So he says here, Usul al-Fiqh. Usul al-Fiqh, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen says, it's a subject which researches the evidences of the rulings from the book, the sunnah, and the ijma' and the qiyas. The subject that researches the evidences of the rulings from the book, the sunnah, ijma' and qiyas, and whatever is connected to this adillah. Whereas Qawa'id al-Fiqh, it's a bahath, a research that deals with that which is specific to fiqh itself, the legislated ahkam, legislated rulings. So there are secondary issues, the connected issues like this. Another text, so he says this in one of his books, the Shaykh. Another place he says, the difference between the two is that Usul al-Fiqh deals with adillah, deals with the adillah, the actual sources. Adillah mubashara, the kitab, the sunnah, ijma' qiyas, we're dealing with the sources of the religion. Whereas Qawa'id al-Fiqh deals with the Masail al-Fiqh. Masail al-Fiqh are the issues in fiqh, salah, wudu, tahara, and rulings and principles in relation to those. So that's the easy way to understand that. The Qawa'id al-Fiqh deals with Masail al-Fiqh. Usul al-Fiqh deals with Adillat al-Fiqh. Adillah, we're talking kitab, sunnah, qiyas. What's proof, what's not proof? How do you know something's obligation? When is it mandub, recommendation? For example, something is specific or is it restricted? These type of things, this is what Usul al-Fiqh deals with. Whereas the Qawa'id al-Fiqh, they are rulings or principles in relation to the Masail. And some of the things that we cover right now, like our brother Majid was teaching, these are from the Masail al-Fiqh. Tahara, and what the rules in governing the Tahara, what's the rules of governing Salah. So when you study the subject, you'll notice that there's a difference between the two. And we know they're interrelated, and some scholars have combined them in one text. So right now we're studying Usul al-Fiqh, and later on we'll cover them more into the Qawa'id. With that being said though, Shaykh Sa'di in his Risala, he mentions about 10 or so Qawa'id in the book. So give you a little bit of understanding of those Qawa'id. He mentions towards the end of the Risala 10 Qawa'id of Fiqh, even though he's covering majority is just Usul. Some scholars, when they talk about Qawa'id of Fiqh, they don't talk about Usul at all. As the brother asked, what does Fiqh mean? The scholars, when they talk about Fiqh, linguistically, they say it means Faham. And we're going to get to the text, the legislative text when we start the text itself. But when you say Fiqh, it means Faham, linguistically. يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي. As Musa alayhi salam, he asked Allah that He gives him ability to, his people can understand him. يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي. Means here, Faham. They have Faham of my statement. They can understand. But then when we talk about here, Fiqh, we're talking about Ahkam, rulings that are connected to an individual who has taklif. And then later on, when we start the text, we're going to get the technical definition of fiqh. But that's just understanding. Fiqh means faham. But when it deals with this, we're talking about the rules and regulations in relation to somebody who is a mukallaf. And these are in relation to the ahkam or a'mal that are done in Islam. And later on, we'll see what fiqh really is about. So here, usul al-fiqh is what we're studying. We're not studying qawa'id al-fiqh. Later on, we'll do something in relation to that, inshaAllah. With that being said, then, some will ask, what is then the benefits of the subject? Where is origins? Where is thamarat? The mabadi al-ashara that we did before. So we'll do a bit of that so that we have some understanding of this subject. So first, we gave us now the definition or the difference between the two. So usul al-fiqh is dealing with the evidences. The book, the sunnah, qiyas, and ijma', we're talking about the adillatu mubashara. But when it comes to its origin, the scholars say that usul al-fiqh existed at the time of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It existed at the time of the Sahaba, but it wasn't codified. It wasn't written in books. It came later, at the time of Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, who was considered by ijma', as some scholars said, the first to author in the subject. So how did the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam Sahaba deal with usul al-fiqh? They knew Arabic. And that's one of the two origins of this science. The istimdad, the origin for the science, the background, proofs, is first in the Arabic language, and two, the most important, the kitab and the sunnah. So usul al-fiqh, if you would ask, what are its resources? Quran was sunnah, and then Arabic language. So because the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam Sahaba knew Arabic and knew it very well, they understood when the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said something, Allah said something, they knew the implications of the Arabic. I will give you an example, right, next. But then also in the Kitab and Sunnah there are qawa'id, and there are proofs for all of these things. So because of this, it was known. But later on, when there was new Muslims and the Ummah expanded, there needed to be a codification of the science. So the scholar said then the first to author in this book, in this subject, is Imam al-Shafi'i. Imam al-Shafi'i. And he wrote what was referred to as a Risala. A Risala, which is like the message or the letter, which he was asked to write by one of the contemporary scholars of hadith, who was a student, Abdur-Rahmaan bin Mahdi, rahimahullah. And so he wrote to him this letter in Baghdad, in Iraq. And this Risala, he asked him to teach him, to explain to him how we can understand the nusus. So he wrote this for him. So, but very, very important point, there's two Risalas, Risalatul Jadida and Qadima. When the scholar Shaykh Ahmad Shakir, rahimahullah, in the Muqaddimah of Risala, he says there's actually two of them. The one he wrote in Baghdad, the original one's called Risala al-Qadima. So he wrote to him when he asked him. And then later on, when Shafi'i moved from Iraq, from Baghdad to Misr, Egypt, he wrote and he edited the book. And this is the book we have in front of us today. So if you go into the store or online, you get Risala. Al-Risala, this is the Jadida, they say. We don't know what happened to the Qadima in that we don't have the actual text. But the Jadida is when he modified some things. But why Shafi'i did this? Because he was asked to and he had expertise in the subject of Usul Fiqh. Because number one, he was a scholar on all grounds, all five fields. His Arabic was very good. And then on top of that, he helped to explain how the Sahaba and Salaf dealt with this subject. So here, Al-Razi, he says, Imam Al-Razi, اتفقت الناس, the people have agreed that the first person to write in the subject of Usul al-Fiqh was Shafi'i. And he mentions this in his kitab, Manaqib al-Shafi'i, that he's almost an ijma', if not, no one else different than this, that he's the first. And we'll talk about later on what happened after that. So he's considered, rahimahullah, the founder, if you want to say, of the codification of the science. Not that the first to actually deal with the science, for Rasulullah Sahaba knew it. And we'll give you an example then as well. how the scholars, they already knew, or the Sahaba and them, they understood certain things in Arabic, that it meant certain things already. They didn't necessarily have a need for the Risala the way that we do. We need these Qawa'id now, or these Usul now. So Shaykh Shathari mentioned the example that the Arab, whenever they give a command, you find an amr in Arabic language, they understood it means wujub. It means obligation. So there's a principle then, al-amr lil-wujub. An obligation, it benefits us with a command, benefits us with an obligation. It's be part of Usul Fiqh. Al-amr lil-wujub. So where did they get in the Arabic language? They knew that if someone were to say something, to do something, the way the Arabs understood it in Arabic was always that you have to do it. There was no recommendation. It was a necessary thing. But in the Kitab and Sunnah, the Sharia came to show us that too. Shaykh brings the proof, Surah An-Nur, Ayah 63. فَلْيَحْذَرِ الَّذِينَ. Let him beware the one who يُخَالِفُونَ عَنْ أَمْرِهِ, that he opposes the affair of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and tusibum fitna or yusibum adab alim, lest a punishment or a fitna afflict him, or a severe punishment. So Surah An-Nur, Ayah 63, Allah is showing us that if you oppose the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his amr, what happens? You get this wa'id, this threat of punishment. So which means amr lil-wujub. Otherwise, the Rasul, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not threaten us with the punishment if we oppose his obligation or his command, unless the command meant obligation. Another hadith, we know many of us, Hadith Abu Hurairah, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ma amartukum bih, whatever I order you with, fa'tu bihi mastata'atum. Do as much as of it you can. Fa'tu minhu mastata'atum. Come towards it, do as much of it as you can. So whatever I order you to do it as much as you can." This shows a command leads to obligation. So the Arabs and the Sahaba, they understood this. But then when Shafi'i rahimahullah wrote, he helped to explain for the beginner such things, because it wasn't clear to them all those different principles. Now, in terms of the marahil, there in history, then there was changes and stages and phases of the authorship when it comes to this subject of Usul Fiqh. So the first we said with Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, and he wrote more than one book. Jima' al-Ilm, he had another book, Sifatul Nahi, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the attributes or characteristics of the prohibitions of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Al-Risala. So he wrote many books in this subject. Then followed by him like Imam Ahmad. In certain of his Masail, he dealt with Usul Fiqh, because he's the biggest student of Imam Shafi'i. And so the earlier stage, the Salaf were dealing with Usul Fiqh. And this, the scholars mention a benefit, as Shaykh Shathari says, that some people believe Usul Fiqh is an innovative science. He said, rather, this science is Salafi. It's from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. For the first author, it was Imam Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So some people, they mistaken this, because some of the great Imams who authored later on were ascribing to certain ideologies which were not, or in opposition to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So it's not to be confused to say that this science is from them. It's from Ahl Sunnah. They're the ones who authored. Because the second stage was that the science continued by big Imams. So after Shafi'i, Ahmad, and others like this, big A'immah wrote in the subject. For example, Khatib al-Baghdadi, he wrote Al-Faqih wal-Mutafaqih. And this book is a book of Usul Fiqh based on the Muhaddithun, Asanid, and bringing change in narration to the Sahaba and Salaf, how they understood Fiqh. Then Ibn Abdul, same time period, Jami' Bayan Ilm al-Fadli, he does the same. So some refer to it as Marhatul Isnadiyya. This was a time period of Isnad, change of transmission in relation to Usul Fiqh. Then after that came the Marahil that many people were known in terms of where Usul Fiqh became most popular, which was the scholars who were affected by Kalam. Marhatul Kalamiyya, the position or the time period where scholars of Kalam, theological rhetoric, they became popular in the subject of Usul Fiqh. So examples like Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, and later on others who followed him, and then they popularized the science. Till today, some of their original works, which were summarized, became a foundation for the subjects today. So some people confuse that marhala to mean that this is the origin. Forgetting that, the big Imams preceded them. Not only by one generation, 2-3 generations sometimes. And lastly, some scholars mention a third rise, which is the time of Ibn Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah ibn Qayyim, which is a return back to the Isnad and the Adillah, which they revived Usul Fiqh, but now taking it back to the Qawa'id, the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, taking it back to the Salaf, and purifying it from the Kalam. And that's why if someone were to study Usul Fiqh, he or she will become confronted with a lot of philosophy and rhetoric. So therefore, students should be wary if they're studying Usul Fiqh, not to jump and dive into it, step by step, because some of the books, they're full of this. And you will not understand any of it, maybe you confuse yourself in it. So that's why it's important to know that the books that are recommended to study in this subject are those free of kalam and free of theological rhetoric. Otherwise, it's very difficult to understand, and it's not something which is beneficial. Some of it is not beneficial at all, even, because it doesn't deal with the Kitab and Sunnah. So with this being said, the scholars also mentioned the benefits, and the benefits are many. One of them is you can understand the Kitab and Sunnah. With Usul al-Fiqh, you're able to now understand how evidences are derived. What is an evidence, what is not? When is something actually qiyas, an acceptable analogy, what is not? So without Usul al-Fiqh, you wouldn't understand the Kitab and Sunnah correctly. Another benefit, you protect yourself from misguidance. So if you don't have Usul al-Fiqh, you will read one ayah, one hadith, and now you turn to another ayah, hadith, get confused. You don't know how to reconcile. You don't know how to make tarjih. Give one over the other. You won't know anything. And Shaykh Shathari gives an example, even Aqeedah. Without Usul, you'll read one ayah, and then you'll take that as your proof for your belief, forgetting there's another ayah that opposes it. Whereas Ahl Bid'ah, that's what they do. They take one ayah or one hadith and they walk with this, forgetting that there's another one that confronts or counters it. Whereas Ahl Sunnah, when we deal with evidences, we collect all of it on the table, then study it to get the correct ruling. So he mentions the example, alright, some of the Khawarij they fell into, when they make takfir of the one who falls into major sins. They take one proof, or many proofs, but they use, for example, the hadith, لا يزني زاني حين يزني وهو مؤمن. That the one who commits fornication or adultery is not a believer while they're doing this. So say, this is proof, he's a kafir. For if you're not a believer, what's after that except for kufr? The way that they understood it. Then the Murji'ah came and counted them and said, the Rasul said the opposite. ما من عبد, there's not a single servant who says, قال لا إله إلا الله ثم مات على ذلك إلا دخل الجنة. That there's no servant who says لا إله إلا الله and then dies upon it except he's a Muslim or goes to Jannah. So this is proof that whatever you do in life, if you die with La ilaha illallah, to Jannah. Do major sins or no major sins. Each of them is walking with one evidence. They're not trying to combine. So if me and you don't have usul, we'll get confused. What about this and what about that? Whereas Ahl Sunnah, the way they combine between them both, they say both are from Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. One of them shows if you commit zina during that state of that act, before someone repents, he moves from being the true believer with perfection iman towards a believer with deficient iman. Because when you don't go from iman to kufr, iman to Islam, what happened to Islam? And then the others, they mention the hadith there, the one who dies upon shahada, it shows that he dies upon Islam, but he's still underneath Allah's will because he still committed that sin. So Ahl Sunnah usul help us to harmonize texts. Another benefit about usul as well, it helps you to benefit from the studies that you have. Because usul, they collect all these different things you study, and they help you also to understand and benefit more. Rather, if you don't have usul, you'll be relying upon your intellect, and sometimes you'll be making grave errors. The scholars also mentioned the intent of the usul al-fiqh is to help us make istinbat, to derive the rulings from the kitab and the sunnah. So it's not for it just to use for our own knowledge, it's for helping deriving the rulings which are obligatory upon us. How can we practice the deen Allah the way Allah wants us? And that's the intent, to please Allah by learning these rules so we can practice the deen the way Allah wants. Another thing they also mentioned in general, it protects us from falling into taqleed, blind following, and following to things that are from that. So for example, if you don't have qawa'id, you rely upon somebody, his statement, forgetting that. You need to have the understanding of where a scholar comes from. How did he reach that ruling? Whereas if you don't have this usul, you become muqallid. You listen to anyone and everything they say, for you can't understand it yourself, and nor do you have the tools to. In terms of its ruling, the scholars say it's fard kifaya for individuals, but some have said fard ayn, so they differed a bit on it. But like any other science, fard ayn for the individual or the community. Someone has to have this knowledge. For us, fard kifaya, in that if you know it, inshallah it will suffice you. If someone else that knows it, and they teach you. But as a student of knowledge, it's a must that they know it. For a student of knowledge, a must. So they go in levels, like 1, 2, and 3. Not, you just jump to the biggest of text. Also, the scholars, they mention in general, there's a need for the student to be cautious of studying this subject with haste or without being patient in it, for there is difficulty in the beginning and it becomes easy. And that's why there's explanations to this text. And the scholars say start with something like this, because if you go to another muraqat or waraqat itself, it's harder than this. And also the scholars, they have a set of curriculum for usul al-fiqh and books for qawa'id al-fiqh. And so next week we'll go into this actual text and we'll go bit by bit with this sharh of the Shaykh Sa'ad, Hafidhullah. But we also recommend that the student, he knows there are books that they read. So some scholars say, for example, you begins with something like this, and then you can move on to waraqat, Imam al-Jawaini, or the Nazm, the poem version. And from there you go to a book of Imam Shinqiti, Mudakkar Usul Fiqh, Mudakkar fi Usul Fiqh. This is like the end, they say, for someone who does wants sufficiency. There are bigger books, but some are difficult and not needed. Whereas the scholars, they talk about Qawa'id al-Fiqh, then they say you could begin with the Shaykh Sa'di's kitab, Manzuma Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya, which is a poem version in the Qawa'id al-Fiqh. And then from there he has another book which has to do with more. Right? They call it, he referred to the book Qawa'id al-Jami'ah, I believe it's called, where he gathers about 60 of the different principles of Qawa'id al-Fiqh. And then there's a higher, finally one they mentioned, Qawa'id min Rajab, which is the highest of them, which is the most complicated and most comprehensive. But nonetheless, for us, we start with this. And so inshallah, if we understand this text properly, and we have first foundation, a brick, and from there we'll go step by step to that which is higher. So this is like an introduction for us, and also the importance for us to also know that this science is one that we should pay attention to. Very important that if you're studying Islamic knowledge, pay attention to the usul, always, in every field. Usul al-Fiqh, we're doing here. There was usul al-Tafsir, which was studied before in other lessons. We have usul al-Aqidah, we have usul and everything. Study the usul. And for a student of knowledge, we should not skip the usul. Don't want to jump from the usul and try to get to the fudul or the fusul, the secondary issues. Because at the end of the day, you will realize after many years of study, you have nothing with you of knowledge. All you have is a little bit from here and there. You couldn't even combine them together to make sense of what you have. And this is something some students, they suffer from. They study all these issues but no usul. And also, one last thing we mentioned to end with this, usul is more challenging in the beginning than other subjects because it's from the foundations. And you need to build it step by step. So with that difficulty, we should not run from it. Rather, we approach it with ease, step by step. So if we do this, it becomes easier. Otherwise, you will skip the usul and you will suffer from lack of knowledge. Inshallah, we'll end with this much. Next week, we'll begin the Risala, step by line by line, and with the sharh of the Shaykh. If anyone has any questions or something they want to add.
The book Imam Shafi'i, is it translated?
Actually, it is translated. Risala, Imam Shafi'i is translated. I don't know the translation, how good it is, or who translated it, but it's available there. I've seen even print form. That's the whole thing.
Would you advise beginners to read it?
We would not advise a beginner to read something like this because the Risala is more complicated. It's complicated, it's more advanced, and it's, again, if someone has no foundation, he needs to start with something much easier. So those sources, the ulama, they explain, they have done even tahqiq on it, verification. This is for the advanced level. For a beginner, they need something like this, where they start with the basics. So we not advise someone just to pick it up and read it, or to go to the works of Imam Ghazali or Razi or anyone just to try to study from there. For he'll be more harmed than benefited. There is a translation, but what we'll do, we'll use the Arabic text and we'll translate as we go along. And we'll come to the benefits that we need. Right, so we posted the method, we'll use the method, it's not very long, and we'll translate as we go along and give some examples. It's posted, yeah, I think that someone can see the Arabic method for it. Yes.
Also, can you repeat the definition for Usul al-Fiqh?
So the ulama Shaykh Uthaymin said Usul al-Fiqh is a subject which researches the evidences of the rulings from the books, Sunnah and Ijma' and Qiyas, and whatever is connected to that. So really, Usul al-Fiqh deals with the adillah, the research in relation to the adillah, the actual evidences in this religion. And some have said it's also the subject in which somebody he's learning the rules to derive the benefit from the Quran and Sunnah directly. Right? So Usul al-Fiqh deals with adillah, Qawa'id al-Fiqh deals with Masail al-Fiqh. Yes.
So the Arabic language doesn't make
linguistically, yes. So how the Arabs use Arabic and what Arabic words can mean and how they're used. So when we get into the text, Shaykh Sa'di will show us some examples of how the Arabic is important in this subject. But of course, that doesn't mean that's the only origin. The Kitab and Sunnah is most important. Yeah. So, but it's part of its references. Yes.
And Imam Shafi'i, the first author of the book about Usul al-Fiqh.
Yes, he's the first one, Al-Risala. So he's the first to codify, but almost by ijma', the scholars say. Yeah.
Sorry, one more question. Sometimes people may say that a person should read some of the basics of fiqh before he gets to Usul al-Fiqh. Is that correct, that statement?
Well, it depends. When somebody is studying fiqh, the first thing is obligatory upon him is to know the masail, how to make wudu, how to pray salah. So of course we wouldn't tell someone first study usul al-fiqh if you don't know how to make wudu. You have to pray. So you learn those masail and then later on you get to your usul. So it's very important that for a beginner or someone just new to Islam, we don't tell them you have to study usul al-fiqh. You need to know the masail first, how to make wudu, how to pray salah. That's wajib on you. And then when you do those a'mad or taklifi, then later on when you get to your knowledge, you'll study the usul. Yeah. So it's important. Otherwise, people will never do any of the good deeds until they know the ahkam or the usul. So let it be known that for a beginner, first thing they have to take care of the obligation upon themselves. Yes.
So like, sometimes when you give a dawah to people are not really practicing. So you certain side of the fiqh, there's a difference of opinion. How would you
So we'll get to that inshallah. We're going to get to that, how to deal with difference of opinion. And where did the difference of opinion arise from the first place. So we'll get to that because this is an issue as well. When someone's confronted with difference of opinion, some people they get confused. Some they don't know what to do. So we're going to get to that. When that arises, from where does it arise first? And secondly, how does a student or a person deal with ikhtilaf? So we'll get to that. And at the end, the Shaykh also talks about some of that in terms of even positions where somebody he doesn't even understand the issue. Is there even allowed to be in taqleed or not? We're going to get to those things. Yeah, inshallah. So with this much, subhanakallah bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik.